Disclaimer, this channel's host has a speech impairment. She may be a little hard to understand at first, but if you stick around, you'll get used to it. And you might learn a thing or two while you're at it. Also, this channel is going to have a lot of true crime content. Viewer discretion is advised. Now on with the show.
For nearly 17 years, no one knew or noticed that Margaret Fleming was missing. When authorities finally went to check on her, there were no medical records, no recent photos, and no one who could say the last time they saw her. What started as a simple welfare check quickly spiraled into one of Scotland's most haunting murder cases. A heartbreaking story about betrayal, neglect, and a system that somehow failed to answer one simple question: where is Margaret? Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here. Today I'll be tackling the case of Margaret Fleming. A case about a young woman who went missing for 17 years before anyone noticed she was missing. Well, let's jump into the case. The Forgotten Life of Margaret Fleming. How a young woman vanished for 17 years before the truth emerged. Who was Margaret Fleming? Margaret Ann Fleming was born on November 1st, 1980 in Inverclyde, Scotland. I looked it up and Inverclyde appears to be like a state or a province in Scotland. Here is a map showing where it is. From what little is known, she was a shy, gentle girl who struggled a bit with learning from an early age. Teachers describe her as a quiet figure who wanted to do her best but found school challenging. Reports mentioned she had, quote, moderate learning difficulties, unquote, and often needed encouragement to get through daily tasks. Her reading level was that of an 8-year-old, even when she was a teenager. Here's a clip from a British true crime documentary where someone who knew Margaret described her learning difficulties.
Margaret had learning difficulties growing up, which wasn't diagnosed until later. At primary school, it was identified that she had problems with reading and writing, which later were revealed as learning difficulties. And this would have had an impact on friendships and how she related to other people and how other people related to her.
Her childhood wasn't easy. Here's another clip from that same documentary where a journalist and a psychologist talk about Margaret's strange relationship with her mother.
When Margaret was about 12 or so, she didn't get on with her mother particularly, so she moved in with her father and his parents.
She was very closely bonded to her father. She had quite a fractious relationship with her mum, but her and her dad were a little unit.
Margaret's parents split up when she was young, and by her mid-teens, she was living with her grandparents, who themselves had health issues. When her father died in 1995, Margaret was just 15 years old. A social worker later described her as a lonely, isolated girl whose life was uncertain. Around that time, two acquaintances, Edward Carney and April Jones, offered to take her in, promising to give her a safe home. But not everyone was convinced this was the best home for Margaret. Here's a clip from that documentary where her stepmother expresses her concerns.
I just didn't like the guy. Avril wasn't that bad, but she was controlled.
She moved in with Carney and Jones into a small cottage on the 5th of Clyde in a small, quiet village called Urban Kemp. After that, her world became smaller. Teachers and social workers lost touch. She dropped out of the limited educational programs available to her. Friends and extended family drifted away. By 1999, Margaret's name had all but disappeared from public view. Like many of these cases on the channel, we know relatively little about who Margaret was as a person. There are no records of hobbies, no photos of her as a teen, no letters or diaries to pore over. She is only seen through the lens of reports. A learning disabled young woman, a vulnerable adult, or a missing person. She never got the chance to tell her own story. That silence highlights a deeper tragedy. Margaret's case isn't just about her death. It's about how she was forgotten long before she was gone. The Disappearance. Margaret vanished somewhere around December 1999 and January 2000. At the time, she was living in the cottage with Carney and Joan, who claimed to be her caregivers. They were collecting benefits on her behalf, but neighbors saw very little of her. When she was seen, she seemed isolated and withdrawn. When she went missing, no one realized it. There were no missing person reports, no welfare visits, no social service checks. Benefits reportedly for her continued to arrive year after year for nearly 17 years. Carney and Jones offered different stories over the years about where Margaret may have gone. Sometimes they said she moved to England. Other times they claimed she joined the commune or was traveling. They even faked documents to keep up the illusion she was alive. Meanwhile, Margaret had effectively vanished from every official record. Like I said before, there were no doctor visits, no employment records, no contact with authorities. The welfare check that changed everything. In 2016, the UK government introduced new rules requiring face-to-face interviews for benefit recipients. When authorities tried to arrange a meeting with Margaret Fleming, they hit a startling wall. They When police arrived at the college, Carney and Jones gave conflicting stories about Margaret's whereabouts. They claimed she was living with friends, or working with travelers, or staying somewhere else. Their story was always shifting, but no one outside of their circle had seen her since 1999. This led to a full-scale investigation. Police searched the home and surrounding areas, bringing in specialists and excavators. They found absolutely no trace of Margaret. Here is a clip to explain their findings.
Looking at the state of Jones and Kearney's home, detectives feared clues to Margaret's fate lay inside rather than outside.
The condition that that house was in was unlivable. It was a mess. It was contaminated with all sorts of stuff. What we'd be looking for here would be traces of Margaret in the house. Is there anything that indicates that she'd come to some sort of harm?
The detectives searched every inch of the house. They did not want to miss any evidence that would shed light on the miserable ordeal suffered by Margaret.
The police spent quite a time there trying to see any evidence at all that Margaret had been living there as they claimed. So, for example, are there any of her belongings here? Nothing. Toothbrush, even. No, she carries everything in a bag that she carries with her all the time, according to Avril.
They dug the garden, they searched the home, which I think was a very complex operation because the house was just full of rubbish. I think for the first time in Police Scotland's history, they set up a mobile laboratory in the couple's garden so they could test and analyse each item that came out of the house.
Everything that was handed over as being Margaret's was either Eddie's or Avril's, and when subjected to scientific examination, revealed no trace of Margaret's DNA.
Of all the thousands of objects that they tested, there was no sign of Margaret being there.
And that is something that is strange. And that is something that makes you think, has there been cover-up? Or has harm come to her some time ago? There was no forensic evidence to show that Margaret was in that house. But there was evidence from witnesses that speak to her being there, albeit some time ago. And that's important. So she was definitely in that house. She was there, it's just that she disappeared off the radar. And the only people that were there were these two carers.
The evidence pointed to foul play. They also discovered that the couple had been collecting her disability benefits for years after she was last seen. And like I said, throughout the years, the couple gave conflicting stories about Margaret's whereabouts.
When police interviewed Avril Jones's mother about Margaret's possible whereabouts, she immediately shot a big hole through the couple's version of events.
Avril's mother was astonished at the notion that the police would expect to find Margaret there because, as far as she was concerned, many years ago, Margaret had gone and had never been back.
There was a phone call between Avril Jones and her mother about the 5th of January 2000. Avril had told her mother that Margaret had gone off and had disappeared.
Avril had said to her mother that Margaret, who would have been 19 at the time, had left with a traveller.
The very idea that Avril's mother, who lives nearby, was telling the police, Margaret's not here and has not been here for years, whereas Eddie and Avril were saying she was here 10 minutes ago, didn't gel.
Detective Superintendent Paul Livingstone later said, Margaret Fleming was a vulnerable young woman who should have been cared for and protected. Instead, she was exploited, isolated, and ultimately lost her life at the hands of those she trusted. The trial and its shocking conclusions. In 2019, Carty and Jones faced a trial at the High Court in Glasgow. Prosecutors accused them of killing Margaret somewhere between December 1999 and January 2000, then hiding her body to cover up their crime. They also charged them with benefits fraud. The case was built primarily on circumstantial evidence. There was no body or forensic evidence of her death. Instead, prosecutors relied on years of lies and the fact no one had seen Margaret since the late 90s. And the ongoing benefit payments also pointed to foul play. Witnesses testified that the couple gave strange, inconsistent stories about her whereabouts. Some said they were told she was away with travelers. Others said they were told she was living in the Highlands. The evidence painted a picture of two people exploiting Margaret's vulnerability. In May 2019, after a long trial, Carty and Jones were found guilty of murder and fraud. They were each sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 14 years before parole. During the sentencing, Lord Matthews condemned their actions, calling it, quote, a shocking breach of trust. He told them, you took advantage of a vulnerable young woman for your own benefit and subject her to a fate that remains known to only you. To this day, Margaret's body has never been found. Despite multiple searches and excavations, her remains remain a mystery. The broader failures and lessons learned. Margaret Fleming's case shocked Scotland. How could someone vanish for nearly 2 decades without anyone noticing? It exposed serious flaws in how social care, law enforcement, and social services work together, especially when it comes to protecting vulnerable adults. A 2023 review by the Urban Council concluded that Margaret's disappearance went unnoticed because of a, quote, lack of coordinated responsibility, unquote, between different agencies. Once she moved in with Carty and Jones, no one followed up to ensure her safety. The system essentially let her slip through the proverbial cracks. Authorities admitted they failed her completely. Since then, the Scottish government and local agencies have pushed for tighter monitoring and better cooperation to prevent similar tragedies. Detective Superintendent Livingstone summed it up well. Margaret Fleming's case is a stark reminder that society has a duty to protect its most vulnerable members. We owe it to people like her to listen and to act before it's too late. Remembering Margaret. Her story isn't just about violence, it's about invisibility. Margaret lived on the margins, unnoticed and unmissed. Her existence reduced to a line on a government form. When authorities finally came looking, it was already too late. Her case made Scotland confront some hard questions. How could someone so vulnerable disappear without anyone noticing? How could two people exploit and murder her while secretly benefiting from her absence for nearly 2 decades? And how many others might be out there, unseen and unheard? In the aftermath, advocates and social care groups call for stronger safeguards, more frequent welfare checks, and better communication between agencies. They emphasize that every person, regardless of abilities or circumstances, deserves connection, oversight, and to be known. Though Margaret's body has never been found, her story endures. It serves as a warning and a lesson, reminding us that silence can be deadly and that every voice matters. Her life may have been short and quiet, but her death has spoken volumes about society's responsibility. She is remembered now not just as a victim, but as a symbol of what happens when we look away, and why we must never stop listening. Well, that's it for Margaret's case. I hope you found this interesting and informative. There are lots of cases like these out there, and I plan on covering them to give voice to people who couldn't have a voice of their own. If you like what I'm doing, please leave a comment. It really helps me out. If you like this content, you know what to do. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.